There is a moment in every human life when silence feels safer than truth, when turning away feels easier than staring at the abyss, and in those moments, most people don't even realize they are selling pieces of their humanity, not for power, not for survival, but for something far more pathetic. Comfort in routine, in ignorance, in believing that the monster at the edge of town doesn't exist, so long as no one speaks of it. Stephen King once said, "The trust of the innocent is the liar's most useful tool." In Salem's Lot, the town isn't destroyed only by vampires. It's destroyed by the willingness of ordinary people to look away, to protect their fragile peace instead of confronting the truth clawing at their doors. We like to think evil comes with fire and blood, with grand spectacle, but the truth is more sinister. Evil creeps in quietly, carried on whispers, small compromises, the shrug of a neighbor who chooses not to notice. It begins in moments that seem harmless, the unreported cruelty, the hushed domestic violence behind closed doors, the corruption overlooked because it feels too exhausting to confront. In Salem's Lot, the vampires are only half the story. The other half is a town of people who had every chance to fight, but instead clung to the illusion that nothing was happening until it was too late. Fear is not just the beating heart of horror stories. It is the silent architect of human morality. Fear makes cowards of good people. It makes them surrender justice, compassion, and responsibility at the altar of self-preservation. We like to tell ourselves that morality is steady, a compass pointing north no matter the storm. But morality is fragile, and fear is a master locksmith with a single twist. It can break open the vault where our values are stored. In that moment, ordinary people like you, like me, become accomplices in their own destruction. Think of the times you have looked away. Maybe you saw someone bullied and chose not to step in because you didn't want the spotlight to turn on you. Maybe you witnessed injustice, a colleague mistreated, a child humiliated, a neighbor abused, and told yourself it wasn't your business. Those choices do not evaporate into the air. They linger in the body, in the conscience, like an infection slowly spreading. Every time you refuse to act, you make a deal with yourself. I will stay comfortable, and in exchange, I will sacrifice a little of my humanity. This is why King's work resonates, not because of the vampires or the ghosts, but because he strips away the masks we wear and shows us what we look like when fear presses its weight on our chest. He forces us to acknowledge that the true terror lies not in the supernatural, but in the ordinary decision to do nothing, to walk past suffering because it is inconvenient, to retreat into silence while the world burns just beyond the porch light. And here is the irony. Fear convinces us that inaction will keep us safe, but in reality, it is inaction that destroys us. Evil feeds on hesitation. Darkness thrives in quiet rooms where no one dares to scream. The town of Salem's Lot didn't fall in a single night. It rotted slowly, abandoned piece by piece by those who decided their comfort was worth more than their courage. When the final collapse came, it wasn't just the work of monsters. It was the work of neighbors, friends, and families who chose denial over defiance. There is a peculiar cruelty in comfort. We convince ourselves it is kindness, that sparing ourselves discomfort spares others as well. But the truth is the opposite. Comfort is selfish. It blinds us to the wounds of others. It seduces us into believing that, as long as we are untouched, nothing else matters. And yet, History whispers otherwise. It tells us of towns that vanished because their citizens closed their eyes. It tells us of horrors not born from tyrants alone, but from thousands of small silences stacked like bricks. Imagine for a moment the faces of those in Salem's lot who saw strange figures lurking, heard cries in the night, and dismissed them as imagination. They traded vigilance for denial, courage for silence. They chose the soft pillow of ignorance over the jagged truth, and in doing so, they unlocked the gates for their own undoing. The vampires did not need to be clever. They only needed the townspeople to be passive. Isn't that how fear works in your own life? Not through grand gestures of terror, but through quiet suggestions. A whisper that says, "Stay quiet, stay comfortable, don't get involved." And each time you listen, each time you give in, you sell another piece of yourself. Piece by piece, choice by choice. Until one day you may discover that you are no longer the person you thought you were, that you too have become part of the silence that allows monsters to flourish. And here is the most disturbing truth. The day ordinary people sell their humanity for comfort rarely looks like a tragedy. It looks like normalcy, a calm street, a polite dinner, a town that seems unchanged, even as something poisonous begins to pulse beneath its skin. We imagine apocalypse with explosions and screams, but more often, it comes with shrugs, with locked doors, with neighbors turning away as shadows spread. So ask yourself, what are you willing to trade for comfort? Would you rather keep your peace while someone else suffers, or shatter your own safety to preserve theirs? This is the question at the heart of Salem's lot, and it is the question that haunts all of us, whether or not we choose to answer. Comfort is a drug, and like every drug, it numbs before it destroys. We tell ourselves we are buying time, buying peace, buying distance from the storm, but storms don't wait. They grow, gathering strength while we sit paralyzed, rocking ourselves in the cradle of denial in Salem's lot. This denial is almost ritualistic. The townspeople cling to their routines, their gossip, their small-town dramas. Even as darkness begins to gnaw at the edges, they cannot admit the unthinkable, because admitting it would require action, and action means risk, confrontation, and the possibility of losing everything they have hoarded in the name of safety. This is the psychology of mistakes, not the mistakes we make in haste, but the mistakes of neglect, the mistakes of standing still when everything inside of us screams to move. Criminal psychology tells us something chilling. The bystander is often more dangerous than the perpetrator. Not because they strike the first blow, but because they allow it to land unchecked. Inaction is not neutrality. It is silent complicity. And the mind justifies this complicity with 1,000 clever lies. It's not my fight. It's not my place. Someone else will step in. These lies are the chorus of decay, the lullaby of societies that eat themselves from within. Fear is clever. It reshapes itself to fit every situation. Sometimes it disguises itself as practicality. Don't get involved, you have a family to protect. Sometimes it cloaks itself in morality. It would be wrong to judge, better to stay out of it. And sometimes it seduces us with apathy. Nothing you do will change the outcome anyway. In all its forms, fear whispers the same command. Do nothing, and so we obey. Not realizing that obedience is the exact currency evil requires. But what does this do to the soul? What does it mean to carry the knowledge that you looked away when you could have acted? The first time, it feels like relief. The second time, it feels like habit. By the third, you are no longer a witness. You are part of the silence. The psychological weight of unacknowledged guilt is corrosive. It erodes compassion. It fosters resentment. It transforms people into shells who believe they are moral, while their actions, or lack of actions, tell a darker story. The tragedy of Salem's Lot is not just the destruction of a town. It is the revelation that the town was already destroyed long before the vampires came. The monsters only revealed the rot that had been festering beneath the surface. And this is where the story cuts deep, because it forces us to examine our own neighborhoods, our own families, our own lives. What rot have we allowed to spread because we feared discomfort more than we feared corruption? What cruelties have we tolerated because silence was easier than courage? The human struggle is not against monsters. It is against the mirror, against the reflection of ourselves when stripped of excuses. Because what is morality if it collapses under pressure? What is compassion if it withers when tested? These questions cut sharper than any vampire's teeth, because they reveal the possibility that the true horror lives not in the shadows, but inside us. Imagine the faces of those you love. Imagine their voices. Now ask yourself, if they were the ones being dragged into darkness, would you stay silent? If the screams came from your child's room, your partner's lips, your friend's soul, would you still choose comfort? Or would you finally rise, risk, and fight? And if you would rise for them, why not rise for the stranger? Why not for the voiceless, the invisible, the forgotten? The psychology of fear tells us that humans draw tight circles of concern, protecting those within while abandoning those without. But morality demands a broader circle. It demands we stretch ourselves beyond instinct, beyond the safety of tribal walls, because the moment we decide some lives are too distant to matter, we have already begun the transaction. Humanity traded for comfort. The most dangerous lie of all is that these choices are small. That looking away once, twice, 100 times does not matter. But everything matters. Every silence matters. Every refusal matters. Evil thrives on the accumulation of tiny concessions. It does not need your sword, only your silence. And when enough silence is gathered, it becomes a fortress no truth can penetrate. This is the haunting truth Stephen King threads through his work. Horror is not about the monsters that invade our towns. It is about the choices we make when they arrive. Do we fight, or do we hide? Do we confront, or do we retreat? Do we sell our humanity piece by piece until nothing remains? Or do we endure the agony of discomfort to preserve something greater than ourselves? And here, the story turns inward. Because perhaps the vampires of Salem's Lot are metaphors. Perhaps they are not. But the question they raise is not metaphorical at all. When the darkness comes knocking, and it always does, who will you be? The bystander who turns away, or the flawed human who dares to act, even knowing they might fail? The greatest torment is not what darkness does to us, it is what we allow it to make of us. Every time we choose silence over confrontation, every time we trade truth for ease, we carve out pieces of our own soul. And once carved, those pieces do not grow back. The residents of Salem's Lot did not wake up one morning as villains. They woke up as shopkeepers, teachers, churchgoers, parents, ordinary people who slowly stopped seeing themselves as guardians of one another. They abandoned the sacred duty of community. the unspoken vow that one human life should matter to another. And so, they were already hollow when the shadows came. This is the essence of inner turmoil, knowing the right thing and burying it beneath layers of fear, habit, and rationalization. That conflict corrodes more deeply than any wound. It whispers into the conscience like poison. How many times have you lain awake, replaying what you should have done, the words you should have said? That gnawing unease is the mind's attempt to remind you that morality is not theoretical. It is lived, or it dies. Compassion is the antidote, but compassion is costly. True compassion demands action. It demands that you risk comfort, risk reputation, even risk safety. And that is why so many abandon it when it is needed most. They prefer the appearance of decency to the sacrifice of it. But appearances crumble under pressure, and when they do, what remains is the naked truth of who we are, in King's vision of small-town America. The rot is never external alone, it is internal, a community that values gossip more than honesty, a town that prides itself on normalcy, even as its neighbors disappear. The metaphor is brutal and clear. We do not need vampires to drain us. We drain ourselves by refusing to feel, refusing to act, refusing to love in the moments that matter most. Consider how many atrocities in human history have not come from cruelty alone, but from apathy. Genocides allowed because neighbors looked away, corruption tolerated because that's just the way things are. Families destroyed while bystanders whispered, "It's none of my business." These are not accidents. They are deliberate transactions. Each silence is a coin, each shrug is a payment, and the purchase is always the same, a fleeting illusion of safety bought at the expense of humanity itself. The psychology of this transaction is revealing. We do not believe we are choosing evil. We believe we are choosing survival. Yet what is survival if it demands the death of your soul? What good is a long life if it is spent in cowardice? Haunted by the echoes of screams you ignored, fear convinces us that survival is the ultimate good. But survival without humanity is nothing more than existence. And here lies the paradox of action. It terrifies us because it exposes us. To act is to risk failure, ridicule, loss, but to refuse to act is to guarantee emptiness. The people of Salem's lot could have fought. They could have resisted. Some trade, and though they failed, their failure carries a dignity the others will never know. Because even in failure, they remained human, and humanity is worth more than survival. Ask yourself, what does it mean to be alive? Is it to breathe, to eat, to wake and sleep without disturbance? Or is it to feel, to care, to stand in the storm when others run? The answer seems obvious when spoken aloud, but in practice, it is murkier every day. People make choices that prioritize ease over empathy. Every day, someone chooses silence, and every day, the world grows darker, not because of monsters, but because of neighbors who decided that comfort was enough. We do not like to imagine ourselves in these stories. We like to believe we would fight, we would resist, we would shout truth into silence. But history is not filled with heroes. It is filled with ordinary people who chose the soft chair, the quiet meal, the locked door. To admit this is painful, but it is also liberating. Because once we recognize the truth, we can choose differently. The emotional struggle of admitting complicity is immense. It is easier to believe you are innocent, that the burden belongs to someone else. But innocence is not passive, it is active. To remain innocent, you must resist the temptation to do nothing. You must pay the price of action. And if you have already failed, if you have already looked away, then redemption requires acknowledgement. It requires that you stop pretending silence was neutral. It requires that you confront the weight of your inaction and decide whether you will continue paying that price. King's lesson is not one of despair, but of confrontation. He does not write to remind us of monsters we cannot defeat. He writes to remind us of the monsters within, and to force us to ask, will you let them rule you, or will you defy them? However imperfectly. The battle is never clean, never without scars. But scars are proof that you lived as a human, not a shadow. The day ordinary people sold their humanity for comfort was not a single day. It was every day they chose silence. Every day they justified inaction. Every day they closed their eyes to the suffering that screamed at the edges of their world. And if we are not careful, it can be every day for us as well. Unless we decide that compassion is worth more than comfort, and humanity is worth more than survival. Collapse never comes suddenly. It arrives like a slow leak in the walls, a creeping dampness that no one acknowledges until the foundation crumbles. The tragedy of Salem's lot was not that the vampires came, but that when they did, the town was already hollow. The true collapse began long before, the moment the townspeople learned to look away. That is how decay works. It does not announce itself with thunder. It seeps into the ordinary, disguising itself as convenience, as routine, as comfort. Every society believes it is different, that its structures are strong, that its values are unshakable. But values are not carved in stone, they are lived in action. And when action is absent, values rot, fear is patient. It waits for people to become accustomed to silence. It waits for them to believe that ignoring the darkness is the same as defeating it. And when they finally realize their error, it is too late. The cost has already been paid. In lives, in dignity, in humanity itself. This is the criminal psychology of denial. People cling to the illusion of safety even as danger swallows them. They rationalize, minimize, normalize. They whisper to themselves, "This isn't real, it's exaggerated, it will pass." These are not the words of the wicked. They are the words of the ordinary. And that is precisely why they are so dangerous. Evil does not need monsters if it can rely on the passivity of ordinary people. The cost of denial is never abstract. It is flesh and blood. It is neighbors who vanish, children who suffer, families who break. It is history written in scars and graves. And still, people tell themselves the same lies because the truth feels unbearable. It is easier to accept destruction than to accept responsibility. But responsibility cannot be buried. It surfaces in nightmares, in guilt, in the haunting recognition that you had the chance to act and chose silence instead. It is the voice in the back of your mind asking, what if I had spoken? What if I had resisted? What if I had cared? These questions do not fade with time. They echo through generations. Children inherit not only the mistakes of their parents, but their silences. There is a passage in King's work where darkness is not an outside force at all. It is the natural result of ordinary people refusing to face themselves. That is why Salem's lot cuts so deeply. It is not about creatures from the grave. It is about the living dead we become when we trade courage for comfort, truth for denial. And what about us? In our time, in our world, how many shadows do we allow to spread unchecked because they threaten our peace? How many times do we dismiss cruelty as someone else's problem? How often do we walk past the suffering of strangers as though it were invisible? Every society has its vampires, but they rarely wear fangs. They wear suits, they wear uniforms, they wear smiles, and they thrive in silence. The collapse of morality is not loud, it is quiet, it is polite. It is the dinner party where no one speaks of injustice. It is the office where harassment is ignored. It is the family that hides its wounds behind closed curtains. These collapses build upon one another until one day, the whole structure falls, and people look around in shock, as though they hadn't been chiseling away at the supports for years. And here lies the most painful truth. Collapse does not just destroy communities, it destroys the self. Because every silence you choose, every denial you cling to, every comfort you protect while someone else suffers, it all collects in you. It weighs on your chest, hardens your heart, hollows out your soul, and by the time you realize it, you are no longer the person you believed yourself to be. So what do we do? Do we hide from this truth, or do we confront it? Do we accept that collapse is inevitable, or do we defy it with the only weapon we have, our humanity? That is the question that makes King's work timeless, because it is the question each of us must answer, not in theory, not in words, but in action. Because collapse is not fate, it is choice. It is 1,000 choices made by ordinary people every day, to deny or to acknowledge, to stay silent or to speak, to look away or to see. And those choices accumulate until they shape the destiny of towns, of nations, of generations. And you, listening to these words now, are not exempt. You are part of that accumulation. Your choices will either add to the silence or break it. Your courage will either hold back the collapse, or your fear will hasten it. And one day, you will look back and ask yourself, did I trade my humanity for comfort? Did I sell it for silence? In the end, the true horror of Salem's lot is not that a town was devoured by monsters, but that the town had already abandoned itself long before the first coffin was opened. The creatures were only a mirror, showing the truth that people had refused to see, that when ordinary men and women choose silence, they become the architects of their own undoing. Evil does not always kick down the door. Sometimes it waits politely on the porch, knowing that sooner or later, someone will open it in exchange for peace. This is the story of every community, every family, every soul. We are all faced with the moment when fear demands we sell our humanity for comfort, and most of us, if we are honest, will admit that we have already sold pieces of it. Perhaps quietly, perhaps unknowingly, but sold nonetheless. And so we walk around with these invisible transactions, pretending we are whole, when in truth we are stitched together by silence. But there is another possibility. We can stop the transaction. We can refuse the bargain. We can choose discomfort, risk, even pain for the sake of being fully human, because the price of silence is too high. It empties us, strips us, leaves us hollow. But the price of courage, though costly, fills us with something silence never could. The dignity of having acted, of having cared, of having resisted the temptation to let comfort consume us. Think of this not as a grand call to arms, but as something smaller, something closer. Think of the moments in your daily life when you see injustice, when you hear cruelty, when you feel the weight of fear urging you to turn away. Those are the moments where the soul is decided. Not in battlefields, not in revolutions, but in kitchens, in classrooms, in sidewalks, in conversations whispered at night. Humanity is sold in small, quiet places, and it is saved there, too. King's brilliance is that he does not let us escape. He does not allow us to believe that the monsters are separate from us. He reminds us that the greatest monster is always within, the part of us that prefers the easy lie to the hard truth, the part that values survival over morality, comfort over compassion, the part that tells us it is safer to stay silent. That monster will never leave us, but we can choose whether to feed it or to starve it. And now, the question is no longer about Salem's lot. It is about you. When the moment comes, and it will come, will you look away? Will you trade your humanity for silence? Or will you endure the discomfort, the fear, the risk, and choose instead to act? The day ordinary people sold their humanity for comfort is not locked in the pages of a book. It is written every day in the choices of each of us. And tonight, tomorrow, in some quiet corner of your life, that choice will come again. When it does, what will you sell? And what, if anything, will you dare to keep?